Network Automation Nerds podcast. Hello, welcome to Network Automation Nerds podcast, a podcast about network automation, network engineering, Python, and other interesting technology topics. I am your host, Eric Cho. Today on the show, I am super excited to welcome my friend James Freeman, co-author of Mastering Ansible, now in its 4th edition. And besides being a published author, James works as a senior technical account manager at AWS, which is the leading public cloud provider, as well as an empowerment coach. I am super excited to welcome James to the show to talk about Ansible, infrastructure automation, cloud, his personal journey, and much, much more. So let's dive right in. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you, Eric. Really great to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to see you again. I remember we first met at one of the Ansible Fest. You actually traveled all the way from overseas to was it Austin or was it somewhere else?
It was in Austin that we met. Yeah.
What was the topic that you spoke on? Did you remember at Ansible Fest?
That one I think was I made some major changes to a production environment on a Friday afternoon. And that was nice. Like we all know that that's like a massive no-no. So it's like, yeah,
what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, for sure.
So that must have been an interesting topic. I think we talked about me and my manager at the time. Well, still my manager at the time. I think we talked about DDoS, but you talked about making major change, and was it fun? Like, what was the gist of the talk about?
So I think the angle of the whole thing was that this is something that you just don't do.
Okay.
You and I both know this. Who authorizes changes to technology environments on a Friday, right? Unless you want to work Saturday, maybe you're on an overtime contract, but most people are like, no, let's not.
Right.
And the whole angle of the talk was, it was actually led by events that happened at a client I was working for, a retailer in the UK. And it was really unusual because they were so enthused by Ansible. They'd never had an automation technology in-house before. They were doing everything by hand.
Oh,
and
no
when
kidding.
They saw how repeatable and how fast things were with Ansible, they were like, hey, we don't have to be so afraid of changes anymore because there's less risk of human error. We know that if it worked in one place, it should, that famous word in worlds of technology, it should work everywhere else. So they were like, and obviously timescales, because I was doing consultancy there, timescales were tight. So there was also a time constraint. And they were like, well, let's just do this because it looks like we can trust it. And yeah, it worked.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it actually worked. It didn't become some kind of like horror story over the weekend that you have to pull 5 different overtime over.
No, not at all. I mean, I think that's why it was a talk. I think if I'd done it and then I'd worked all weekend to fix the mess that I created, that would have been like, well, maybe you shouldn't have done that on a Friday,
Yeah. No, but that would have been a good comeback story, right? Like, oh, I messed it up and the client, kind of lost interest, but we saved the day. But even better that it worked the first time you pulled it off.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, so obviously you're super, knowledgeable in Ansible. Ansible has been kind of in your blood for the last few years. But even before all the Ansible on the cloud stuff, can you just tell us a little bit about how you got into technology, what interests you the most, and kind of your origin story?
Sure. Yeah. So I can't really tell you when I decided I was going to work in technology. I just sort of followed. I was one of these kids at school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I was interested in maths and physics and things like that. I was a complete geek. And my hero when I was a kid was my grandfather, who worked. His final job before he retired was a lecturer at a technical college. But in his earlier days, he worked at a site in the UK called Handson Park. Now, everybody's heard of Bletchley Park in the UK, but less famous is Handson Park, which was like its sister site. So he was one of these really smart guys that could do the cryptic crossword and all these things. I mean, I just looked at the crosswords and I'm like, yeah, I can't do that. But I always loved that he seemed to be able to fix anything, particularly electrical things. And so I did a degree in electronic engineering. I went out then and got on a graduate program for 3Com, who were a really big name back in 1998, but
Oh,
they
for
don't
sure.
exist anymore. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
3Com was the
mean,
bomb. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I remember, excuse me, attending, company all hands where we were like, yeah, we're number 2 to Cisco, and our goal this year is we're going to beat them. We're going to be number 1. And then it's like, yeah, we all kind of know how that one ended. But at the time, it was, yeah, they were serious.
Yeah, I think at the time, because it was gearing toward the dot-com bubble, right? So I think at that time, Cisco was actually had, I think it was 99 that Cisco actually had the biggest market cap as far as like Fortune 500. And if 3Com was number 2, think about the number of ports and the kind of growth acceleration they had. But like you, I kind of came into the technology during that time frame. So I definitely concur that 3Com was, and probably still for a good time after, still is a major player in the field.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think they made a few bad decisions. We're not here to sort of hash over people's past business decisions, obviously, but you know, they didn't survive the dot-com bubble bursting. And yeah, it's such a shame because I remember some of the stuff that we did. I was a hardware engineer back then, and
Yeah.
we really used to test things to destruction. The quality of the products was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I remember they were pretty strong research and development. Perhaps the marketing and the sales and marketing kind of wasn't their strong suit, if I remember correctly. But anyway, so you had your double E degree. It seems like the world was your oyster. You were at 3Com, and then what happened next?
So then there is sort of a downturn in my
Mm-hmm.
career, or at the time, what I perceived as a downturn. I mean, it's like everything has a silver lining, right? Because if I
Exactly.
hadn't been through that, I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
So, but I think when I chose to leave 3Com, I was on my 4th redundancy threat.
Mm-hmm.
So, sort of every 6 to 12 months, the way the employment law works in the UK, they had to put the whole workforce on consultancy, something like that. I forget the word now, but basically there are processes in the UK about how you can make people redundant.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
on the 4th round of that, I went, actually, I don't want to do a 5th round. I'm going to go. So myself and a few others spun off a little company, gave it a go by ourselves for, I think that lasted about 18 months. I mean, again, I saw the writing on the wall and I got out at about the 12-month point because I kind of saw what was happening. I didn't want them to fail because I actually, I cared about the people. But
Mm-hmm.
when you've got a family, I was married by then, and it was like, yeah, okay, I've got to think about me too.
Right.
So
Right.
I
What was
went off.
that? What was the startup or the company that you co-founded about? What?
So it was computer networking
Okay.
again. So we'd observed that 3Com had dropped a lot of its sort of routers and enterprise products.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think that was one of the places, my personal opinion, where they kind of wrong-footed themselves.
Sure.
And so we set about, okay, we've got all this expertise that we gained. Let's see if we can design some high-end switching gear that we can sell, and potentially not under our own name, but if we can sell it to someone else and they'll put their badge on it, that would be good for us. We'd be happy
Oh,
with
I
that.
see. I see. So you're kind of a small shop, and you actually sold hardware versus some kind of software, and you try to be the white label for some of these bigger name, maybe just OEM to you guys.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So, hardware is always a tough business, right? So, it's kind of the hit miss ratio is actually geared toward the miss side, of course.
Yeah.
But you gave it a shot, and it didn't really work out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I was really lucky when I started in the industry as a hardware engineer. The margins on hardware were significant,
Right.
and companies could afford to plow that back into R&D and things like that.
Hmm.
And then, without getting us into a discussion about the ethics of it and everything else, by 2000, 2001, were competing against first Taiwan and then China, and
Yeah.
people who were working sort of 15 hours a day and then sleeping under their desk. And, I mean, it's like I put my hands up. I can't compete with that. I don't want to compete with that, you
Right.
know? So yeah, that was like that was a game changer for the industry. Certainly for those of us who worked in America, in Western Europe on technology, because it was like, wow, okay, we are seriously being undercut, and on the surface of it, the products do exactly the same thing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's unfortunate, but I'm sure those experiences actually gave you different kind of perspective and of course opening up different doors for you as far as, just kind of the knowledge and the connection that you made during that time frame.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, hugely. And I think one of the most important things that I learned from it was actually going from being a sort of inward focused employee to being outwardly focused on clients, focused on customers, focused on vendor relationships and that kind of thing. Because 3Com in its sort of final years outsourced everything. It produced very little itself.
Mm,
It became a badging shop as opposed to
right.
an actual designer of kit. But that brought with it a whole new set of skills and experiences. So, as you say, that was valuable in itself.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because, I mean, like you said, the hardware margin is nowhere near the software margin. But at the same time, if you look at current, networking vendors like Arista or, some of the newer ones, Cumulus, for example, is still high. It's just not as high as software. And they do kind of a combination of they keep a lot of the smarts in-house, but outsource the manufacturing to some of the other places that you mentioned, first Taiwan or China or these other places. And also there's like the Pika 8 where they kind of do the other way around, right? They start as the OEM and then move into kind of having their own brand and so on.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch the market unfold, and I think that was where 3Com, again, personal opinion, sort of they put a foot wrong. Is they outsourced everything, including the IP. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
look today at people like Apple, like just exactly as you said, all the IP, the software, the technology is in-house developed and owned, but the manufacturing is outsourced. And the creation, the capabilities to create the casing, the hardware, the circuit boards, all of that.
Right, right. Yeah, interesting. So you kind of got the chops in like sales and marketing. You kind of have yourself exposure to these manufacturing side of things. But that ended up being folding. And is that when you went go into kind of the value added reseller world, or was that somewhere in between?
That came later.
Okay,
This precipitated my move into IT,
okay,
and I got my first job, my first official IT job at Red Bee Media, which is part of the
okay.
BBC, and I was a support engineer there for a few years, and then went on to Betfair for a few years doing, I suppose, architecture.
Hmm.
Best way to encapsulate what I did. And then on to Tesco in the UK. So I kind of hopped around a bit. Now, all of these were Linux focused roles. They were all inward facing again. So for this part of my career, I kind of put down the whole vendor relations thing, outsourcing thing, and focused on technology, learning technology, design patterns, those kind of things.
Was it
So
a hard transition for you to kind of move into IT? Because obviously you were a pretty senior role and a co-founder of a company, but you mentioned you were in the supporting role back into IT. How was that transition like?
so I think for me, I've been one of these lucky people that my job is what I enjoy. And
Nice.
when I saw that hardware design in the UK was like, I mean, I've still got friends who are hardware engineers in the UK,
Sure.
but the market is more difficult than it was 20 years ago. And I
For
kind of
sure.
went, I'm going to make a strategic change here for me. Now, being involved in computer networking, although I was a hardware engineer, I was constantly around software and computers and that kind of thing. And it was an era where we were moving from hubs and switches to devices with layer 3 capability. So all the testing equipment was becoming increasingly reliant on things like Linux. So it was almost an organic change because I'd been increasingly around all of this. Computers was always one of my hobbies, one of my things I did for fun in the background. So it was like, okay, this is the next logical place for me to go if I'm not going to be a hardware engineer.
Right. So you're like, okay, I'm going to start doing network configuration, management, whatever the client wants, supporting. Is that how you got into Ansible, or was that something else that came later that triggered that?
So more or less, I mean, that period of my career where I was inward focused, I didn't realize it at the time, as I guess most people don't, but that was actually building the foundations for Ansible. And what I seemed to go through was a lot of experiences where I was either directly involved in or around people that were constantly firefighting. And, it was like there never seemed to be any of these sort of closed loops.
Yeah.
A problem would happen and it would get fixed, and you could guarantee that the same thing was going to happen again.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of when,
Yeah.
And, you sort of watched all these really talented people that you were working with running in circles, basically, just doing the same things over and over again. It's like, at the time, that must have sown a seed, like there must be a better way. But I went through 3 sort of experiences where that was common. So there was a piece of me that also assumed, hey, this is normal. This is what working in IT is all about.
Right.
We've all read the Dilbert comics. It's like, yeah, okay, there's a reason they exist. So
yeah, that's funny. You mentioned Dilbert. I haven't heard about Dilbert in a long time, but yeah, no, I was a big fan, and I think Scott Adams, right? And he was an engineer at AT&T, so he was actually from the telecom side of things too.
Yeah. No, I went through a few experiences where it was like, I read his comic strips and it was like, yeah, these have been written by someone who has lived this.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. Anyways, so you were trying to look for a better way to do things. So obviously, there were repeatable failures that people were firefighting for. That's kind of like the story of my life too. But that's another story for another day. But you were just looking for a better way to do things. And what time frame was this? Because that kind of ties back into like the version of Ansible you were using when you first get started on that framework.
Sure. So it all kind of changed about, longer ago. I keep thinking this is recent, and it's actually about 8-9 years ago now. So time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But, yeah, I got bored, basically. And I was like, I want to go do something a bit more cutting edge, a bit more fun. The thing with working in big corporate environments, at least as I had experienced them at that time, is they're always behind the technical curve because they need something that's robust, tested, safe. And I mean, that makes, I understand why that is, but I was like, I want to up my skill set. I want to learn more. And so I went off and joined a value-added reseller, which you alluded to previously. And that was when everything sort of changed, because we were primarily, when I joined, we were a Red Hat Premier partner.
Oh, okay.
But as time went on, we picked up other technologies like Nagios. I never know if I'm pronouncing that right, but
me neither. It's okay. You just say whatever you want, and I wouldn't know the difference.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure that there's people watching this who are like, he said that wrong.
Like, it should be Nagios, but anyways, yeah, it's okay. You're good in my book.
Okay, cool. So yeah, we picked all of that up, and I was picked up originally as a pre-sales engineer, which was kind of interesting because it was all figuring out if things that the client wanted were possible, building demos, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then that morphed into an architecture and consultancy role in its own right, because it was a small business. It was one of these businesses where you could pretty much pick and choose your role. And so that was really exciting because it was back being client focused again. It was back in the world of, okay, I'm seeing what people are doing in the real world with technology, what their pain points are. And then one day our director says to me, hey, Ansible Fest is in London. Do you want to come with me?
Mhm.
And I probably should have known about Ansible at that point. This was, I don't know if this was 2014 or 2015, but this was a long time ago. And I hadn't
Mhm.
even heard of it. And I just went, yeah, sure, I'll come along. It's a day out of the office, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that was it. I mean, I think the thing that I was so taken with was how enthusiastic everyone was there.
Yeah,
The whole conference was just, the vibe was the same as when we were in Austin in 2018. There's so much passion behind it. There's so much like, hey, we're going to make changes to the world with this, you know.
right, right.
And I
Was
think
that
sorry, you go.
no, no? So I was gonna say, so 2014, that was after, no, that was before Red Hat acquired Ansible, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I met people like Bill Nottingham and some of the original
Oh,
founders
okay.
of Ansible there, and then some of them I met, I think, in Austin in 2018 as well. But it was, as you say, they were independent then, and then they got acquired by Red Hat.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I remember that time because, um, of course, that there was this enthusiasm and for a good for a startup, and they were doing a lot of things that were unique, like uh, antipotency, not agentless, that sort of stuff, and that really tie into the networking world. Of course, I think out of all the automation frameworks, like you're talking about SoulStack, you're talking about Puppet, Chef, and Ansible, they were actually doing something unique, and they were doing something very exciting at the time. So obviously, you went to the Ansible Fest, and I think, if I remember correctly, they tried to do it in Europe, in the U.S. In the U.S., they tried to do it 1 year in the East Coast, 1 year in the West Coast, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. And then, by the time I was really getting into it, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be a serial speaker at Ansible Fest, and then COVID, right, and everything changed. It's like, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Then everything just become non-physical tied in. Everything was virtual.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I've been to several virtual conferences over the last 2 years. I even spoke at Ansible Fest last year, but um, it was good, and I think the involvement, the engagement in the virtual Ansible Fest, it was probably one of the best virtual conferences I attended. Um,
Hmm.
Obviously, I didn't attend all of them, but I went to some, and I'm not going to name any names, obviously, but it was kind of like, is there anybody here? No one's talking, no one's engaging, and I think the experiences of the virtual conference world have been really, really variable.
Yeah, I would agree to that. I think it's just a matter of the mindset of the organizer. Sometimes the organizers just thought, we'll put the same agenda, but we'll deliver it virtually, right? And those are tend to be the ones that doesn't deliver as good of an experience because those agenda were meant for physical.
Yeah,
But for those organizers who have the virtual in mind and kind of plan it accordingly, those are the ones that kind of gave us, either the participant or the speaker, more excitement that way. So I'll give you an example. For the Puppet Python meetup, they actually have social event, but how do you do it in a virtual environment, right? So they actually have a place where that has the sound proximity. So you become like a little virtual dot on the screen, and if you move yourself toward the stage, you actually hear the music, and it's almost like you're in
that's
that environment, and then
that's
you
really
can
cool.
actually, yeah, and you actually drag yourself to like the corner, like say, hey, I bump into James virtually, and we want to have kind of a quiet conversation without being interrupted by the music. We could both go to like a corner of the conference room, just like in the physical world, and we'll have a conversation that way. So I think it's two ways. It's the mindset of the organizer, as well as picking out tools like proximity sound.
Yeah, yeah, that is, I mean, that's impressive. I haven't witnessed that myself. I think the other thing I found about Ansible Fest was the gamification. of it.
Yeah.
So, and I hadn't really thought about this at the time, but when you go to a real conference, you pick up 300 stickers and backpacks, and it's like, everybody's playing how much swag can I get and who can I meet.
Yeah. You have a
And
pair of
then,
new socks for the next month.
absolutely. Yeah, that's right. And then you go to some of the virtual conferences, and it's like, it's basically, you might as well be browsing YouTube. It's just, as you say, the agenda just goes out. It's a series of videos, and it's missing it. And then I think Ansible Fest last year, they had this points-based system, so you got points by visiting the different virtual booths and things like this. And then there were the same sort of competitions you'd have at the physical conference, like, hey, if you get this many points, you're in to win a Bluetooth smart speaker or something like that. So it gives you that sort of reasoning to actually go around and engage, as opposed to, I'm just going to sit and watch a video while I shop on Amazon or do whatever, do another browser tab. It's like,
yeah. So no, like drunk shopping. So it's like, okay, no like conference shopping, right? Because you're stuck in front of it, and then you start ending up buying $5,000 worth of socks or something like that on Amazon.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than not being engaged in sort of virtual material, for sure. And it's a real challenge. I mean, I know there's been talk in the press of Zoom fatigue and things like that. I think that the world the last 2 years has really challenged people. I think a lot of people have pulled together really well, and I think it's been really positive. But I think it's really challenged us to look at how we engage, what we can do virtually. I'm going into the office for my job tomorrow, and I'm really looking forward to it because I work virtually. And that's great, but I'm looking forward to some human interaction,
For sure. Yeah, I don't think it's the same. And I think people who could adapt the hybrid model, like you alluded to for AWS, that is really awesome, right? Like you pick and choose the best of both worlds. You can have both the human interaction as well as working on things virtually when you need to concentrate, and when life demands you to be a certain, you could still be productive that way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think that's what we'll end up with, is this sort of hybrid model. Yeah,
especially as a cloud account manager, right? Like so it's kind of interesting how your career progresses, right? Like so you were very focused technical engineer on EE. You start doing development research, but gradually you go into kind of a pre-sale role where it's a combination of sales and a technical ability, and now you kind of fully transition into a account manager role. So how did that go? I mean, I'm curious.
So I guess I got asked that question at the interview as well, and I thought, I better think quick about this, because to me, it wasn't
obviously
a transition.
You passed.
Yeah. I mean, that's the good news, right?
Yeah.
Nice. I think to me, it didn't feel like a transition. It didn't feel like a change, because in the previous role, everything I did was client facing. It was all about supporting clients with their architectures and designs. And when they ran into trouble, I would help them, because not everybody can write a good support ticket, as you know. There's huge variance out there and that kind of thing. So I used to help people write support tickets and manage problems and stuff like that.
Right.
And then I got asked during the interview process, why do you want to move back into support? And I was like, in my head, it was like, I hadn't really thought about it. As far as I'm concerned, this is just me progressing what I've been doing. I've been taking care of clients for a long time. And I'm going to do less architecture now, but it's the same thing. It's focusing on other people, what their technology needs are, and helping them get the best from it. So, and I think I framed my answer in more or less those terms.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, that's a good tip for I guess incoming people who maybe have engineering chops, but they want to move into kind of a business focused role too. Is you're just, from your point of view, you're just helping others, right? And then doesn't really matter which side you're standing on or which role you're standing on. At the end of the day, you're customer focused, and that's what counts.
Yeah. I mean, my whole career, technology is important. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you couldn't walk into a role I've done and not have seen Linux before, and then be like, "Hey, okay, I'm going to be a Linux sysadmin." That would just be a recipe for disaster. But I remember when I got the job at 3Com, or a long time ago now, my only work experience prior to that had been a summer job at Maplin in the UK, who have gone bust now, but kind of like Radio Shack in the US. So
Yeah.
technology
Yeah.
store. And I was amazed that the interviewers were far more interested in the experience I'd had in this summer job dealing with people than they were in the degree. I just spent 4 years getting a master's in electronic engineering. And I
Yeah.
thought that was going to be like, I've spent 4 years doing this. That's the be all and end all. And they're like, no, we're more interested in how you deal with people at your summer job. And I'm like, okay, this
Yeah.
is interesting. Take note.
Right. Right.
But my whole career, I think, yeah, you've got to know the technology, but it's all about people. Because at the end of the day, it's people who build it, it's people who work with it, and then it's people, we're using technology right now to record this podcast.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that kind of mirrors my own perception and my own experience as well, especially for like a larger provider such as AWS and Microsoft, right? Like, so they're not so much interested in what you already know, but your capacity to grow, because they just assume they have to teach you everything. They assume
Yeah.
like whatever you learned in school or previous jobs, all out the window. I mean, not everything, but like 70% is out the window. They have to train you to mold you into this role that they have in mind. So they're more interested in your personal skills, your people skill, how well you write, you read, and communicate. So that kind of resonates with me as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I mean,
Awesome.
I think people in technology are lifelong learners, and I come across that a lot. I know I am. I get bored if I'm not learning something new, you know.
Obviously, right? And
Yeah,
speaking of
sure.
reading and writing and communication, so I know you recently published the Mastering Ansible fourth edition, but I know you've been, and it says co-author, but you've been the main person writing ever since the second edition. So can you take us a little bit of a journey on writing the second edition, how you came about the opportunity, all the way to publishing the fourth edition?
Sure, sure. So I've always been a prolific writer. Not, I've never gone, or at least before the books, I hadn't ever gone pro with it. I had a couple of false starts at blogging that never really went anywhere, and that was mainly because I'd write a few articles and then I'd do nothing for 9 months, and then I'd be like, "This looks really bad" because there's a 9 month gap, and you know,
like
uh,
a lot of us, you're not alone in that for sure. But
no, no, I found some great technical answers on blogs that are clearly dead, but it's like there's just this nugget out there that's like got me out of a jam, and it's like I'm still grateful for whoever wrote that blog and gave up on it.
right,
So,
thank you, BuzzBeater 129, for writing, blog back in 1988 that solved my problem.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I've always enjoyed writing, so it's always been there. I always wanted to write a book. I was going to write a self-help book originally, and then that didn't happen for one reason or another. I think just partly confidence in the subject matter and getting out there and things. And then it was not long after I came back from Austin, actually, and
Mm-hmm.
the Ansible Fest there. I don't know whether there were people from Packet at Ansible Fest or exactly how I got picked up, but just one day out the blue, they reached out to me on LinkedIn
Mm-hmm.
and said, "Hey, we need someone to update the third edition of Mastering Ansible."
Oh, the third
So,
edition. I thought it was the second edition, but I was wrong probably.
no, the second. I'm pretty sure the second edition was still Jesse Keating's work,
Got it. Got it.
and then the third edition was the one I edited. So obviously, I've been very careful to make sure I give him credit, because even now in the fourth edition, there's still code in there that
Mm-hmm.
is based on his work from the first edition. You
Sure.
know,
Sure.
it's and it's not that I'm too lazy to rewrite it. It's that actually, it's good. It's good stuff. And
Right.
one of the great things about Ansible is it's grown, it's evolved. There's so much more to it, but you can still take code, certainly the simpler stuff that would have run under the early 2.0 releases, and run it under Ansible 5, and it still works. And that's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's so great that you don't have to completely refactor your code. So I've taken us a little bit off topic there, but yeah, basically, back to your question. Yeah,
No worries. I love it. I love the fact that you were giving Jesse credits, and I've actually met Jesse because he's actually live in where I live in the Seattle area, and he was the co-founder for the Ansible meetup locally, and that's
Okay,
where I met
cool.
him. But I think he got busy and life happened, so he actually dropped out of hosting these meetups, and that was like maybe 2-3 years before COVID.
Okay, sure. Sure, which is about the same time I picked the books up. So yeah,
Exactly.
life happens, as you say, to all of
Yeah.
us. So
Yeah. So the
yeah,
third edition, they found you, and you were gun hole. You were like, let's do it.
absolutely, absolutely. So got stuck in there and updated that, and it was quite an undertaking. It was particularly doing a full-time job at the same time. Um,
Hmm.
and I've got a son who is on the autistic spectrum, so it's like talk about learning time management and life management skills. There's a whole set of soft skills behind the fact that this happened at all.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. But it was really interesting. I learned a lot about Ansible. I knew a fair bit before I started the book, but there was a lot that I had to learn as I went along as well, because there's a lot of little 80-20 rule. You can use probably 20% of the features in Ansible to do a lot of meaningful stuff. And then when you're
Right.
going to write a book like Mastering Ansible and you're looking at, okay, how do I write my own plugin in Python for Ansible? It's like, there's probably not a lot of people that have had to do that. But if you're
Right.
going to write a book on it, you've got to know how to do that. So, yeah, it was quite an interesting experience because there was a lot of digging through the code and learning to be done.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I'm writing something, like even if I like 99% sure, right? Like I was 99% sure this is how it works, I would still look it up just to make sure of that 1% of possibility that it might be error. So it sounded like that's something you went through as well. Like a fair bit, but there's still little gaps that you need to fill in, even though you're probably in that 0.5% of people who's doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And your name's going in print, right? Because I know you've got
Yeah.
books out there as well. It's like it's got your name on the front, and it's like, yeah. So if I get this wrong, it's going in print with my name against it. It's like,
Right. It's a whole new dimension of like, just I don't know, imposter syndrome, I guess.
yeah, absolutely. And like, yeah, okay, talk about all eyes on me, no pressure, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. James Freeman said this, and it was like, oh well, anyways, but yeah, so no, you were writing the third edition. I'm sure there was a fair bit of an update. And it's kind of funny that fourth edition came out and I noticed it before you did.
yeah, that was classic. That was
Yeah.
absolutely classic. But I must admit that the timing of that coincided with my decision to leave my previous role and move to
Hmm.
AWS.
Hmm.
And the way we did the consultancy at the previous role was we would sell blocks of time to clients, and we'd
Sure.
say, we really don't mind how you use this, just use it up within a year. So a lot of
Hmm.
clients had banked hours.
Yeah.
I had to give 3 months notice. So I gave my 3 months notice, and the clients went, shit, he's leaving. Book, book, book. And I ended up booked up back to back until my
Oh,
very
okay.
last day. And
Oh,
that
okay.
I had no time for anything. And that's like, and even the launch of my own book passed me by because I was just like trying to fend all the clients off.
You're trying to survive, and it's like, what is this book thing? It's no big deal, man. Come on,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
trying to eat and sleep.
Everybody writes books, right? I mean, it's yeah, it's normal.
Yeah, no, that's funny how that worked out. So it's like, I don't know. It's probably like a good comparison, but I think of when you say that, I think of like ice cream punch cards that what I did when I was little, right? Like you go to an ice cream shop and they will say, "I'll take your money for 10 scoops and you can redeem it anytime." So it's kind of like that with the VAR. They sell the blocks, a bunch of blocks of time, and they could like redeem it as long as you're around, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. And as being good at your job is, without wanting to sort of be conceited, is like it's great. It's also a rod for your own back because if you do
Yeah.
decide to move on, people are like, "No, I want your time," and it can
Right.
be
And they already pay
intense.
for it. It's not like they're asking something unreasonable. It just so happened that it all compressed into a short period of time frame.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. And like you say, they paid for it. And it's not like we could go, well, I mean, we could have given their money back, but it's not the same because they actually have things that need doing.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. They said, I don't want my money back. I want James
Yeah,
put his butt in the seat and configuring some Ansible playbook for me.
yeah, you got it. Absolutely.
That's funny. Yeah. So, but I'm glad it worked out for you. I'm glad you survived. Obviously, you're looking well, and Handson, my friend, and you're in AWS, which is doing great. So I'm wondering what's new in the fourth edition. Like, what warrants the update? Was it a big lift for the fourth edition between third and fourth?
I think, well, yes and no, in
Okay.
short.
Hmm.
And the reason I say that is I think psychologically there was a big shift, and that it was big for the publisher as well, because Ansible was working off the 2.x releases and they just seemed to go on and on. And then
Yeah,
they
I
switched to
remember
semantic
that.
versioning, and it's like Ansible 4.0 is coming out.
Mm.
There wasn't even a 3.0. And so there's such a shift in version numbers there. It's like, just from a marketing point of view for a publisher, it's like, well, we can't just sit with a book on Ansible 2.7, which I think the third edition is based on. Memory, you know,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
why would you want to buy a book on something that looks like it's massively out of date because of the versioning number changed?
right, right.
Um,
It wasn't a small one, like you said, right? They were like 4.0 must be gooder. So what is this
yeah,
2.7 crap?
yeah, for sure, for sure. But I mean, there's lots and lots of changes. Not so much in the core engine. The biggest change was the switch to collections.
Okay,
So they moved, because in the 2.x releases, all the Ansible modules, which are what make the magic happen. So if you want to copy a file, that's actually a module in its own right.
right.
Um, and all the modules, I think there were, I can't remember how many thousand there were, but it was a 4-digit number when I published the third
Right,
edition.
right. Which was
And all,
the reason they took so long to update from like Python 2 to Python 3, right? It's because, as you mentioned, it's all these other modules, the core they could control, but all the other modules, and it was a big lift.
oh, huge, huge. And then because all the modules were linked to the release of Ansible, it's
Yeah,
like, if a network vendor released a module with a bug in it, or they release new firmware that requires an update to the module, they
yeah,
can't just release a new module. They have to wait for the release cadence of Ansible to include it. So
right, right.
the whole thing it wasn't scalable,
Yeah,
either for the team managing the code or for the vendors who rely on Ansible for their configuration work. So they
yeah,
split out the core engine of Ansible and the base modules that do the really fundamental stuff.
yeah.
Um, so that became what's now Ansible Core, I think.
Hmm.
I know
Hmm.
that it was called Ansible Base for a while. It's now Ansible Core, and
Okay,
then everything else went into collections.
I
So
see.
which are self-contained packages of Ansible modules, but can be roles, can be even playbook code, other bits
I
and pieces
see.
as well. So
I,
yeah,
Yeah, I have to admit, I mean, the last I worked with Ansible was around 2.5, like closely, write a lot of playbook because between 2.2 and 2.5, so as you alluded to, there's a certain type of release cadence with Ansible. And between 2.2 to 2.5, there was a big change for networking. So between like 2.3, 2.4, there were other changes, but may not pertain to networking. But networking modules really had a big lift in 2.5, and then and that's what I worked on. But so all of these stuff are exciting and new to me about they doing it Ansible Core, Ansible Collection, and so on.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so the book, it's like every chapter's been touched, if for no other reason than that the best practice now is to put the fully qualified collection name in
Ah, makes
for a
sense.
module. So rather than a module called copy, you
Hmm.
should refer to it as ansible.builtin.copy, which is
Right.
really long-winded, but it makes sure that you don't clash. Someone could come along, Cisco, for example, could come along and create a module called copy that, I don't
Hmm.
know, copies your configuration off the switch, for example.
Sure.
Now, if that happened, Ansible can't differentiate between the built-in copy module and the Cisco one because they're
Right.
both called copy. So
Right.
you have to now include the collection name in the in the actual module call. Well, I say have to. You don't have to. I proved in the book, there's an example where I show some of Jesse Keating's original code still runs on Ansible 4.3, I think, which was in the book.
Right.
But there's an order of precedence, and Ansible will look in this sequence for modules, so and it'll pick the first one that it comes across. So there is a danger that you could get unexpected behavior. Let's put it that way.
Right. So it's like they taken a book out of a book out of no pun intended, but
No
they
pun
took
intended.
a note out of Python, right? Like explicit is better than implicit. So it's better if you just spell out and say, this is the collection or the module that I want. And I don't want you to work behind your magic on picking the right precedence for me.
Yeah, it's absolutely that. So the whole book's been updated. So everything is using the best practice for naming. A whole chapter went in on collections, how they're put together, how to write your own, because it's like, well, if this is a big thing in Ansible, you can't have a book called Mastering Ansible that completely ignores collections and how to build them. That's there's sort of a logic there, right?
Right,
So
you could, but it just doesn't do. May not be well received.
exactly, exactly. And then, as you said about networking and Ansible, I put more networking examples in the. There is a chapter at the back which is networking with Ansible. Now, the book is obviously not focused specifically on network automation, but I tried to find some switch images where you can download the firmware for free.
Yeah.
Because obviously I don't want to tell people, hey, go out and pirate this firmware from this manufacturer. You couldn't do that in a published book. But
Right.
there's certain manufacturers who release their firmware for free, and then you can run it up on something like GNS3 and run Ansible against it, which is really great because people can then get some experience in network automation without having to go out and buy their own tin to play with.
Yeah, for sure. It's so I have the book table of contents pull up if you're watching the YouTube video. If you're listening, I kind of describe what it is. It's so it was chapter 13 on network automation. And when I was looking at the book or kind of skim through the chapters, I believe you use like Vias, which is a open source network operating system. And you also gave examples for F5, which is obviously not free, but it's a very common load balancer vendor that you have operation playbook with.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yeah, I think I even found that you could, if you sign up for a free account, you can download some of the Arista switch images as well.
Oh,
So
for sure.
there's
Yeah, like the
examples from that
EOS.
in there as well. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so EOS obviously is from Arista and very popular, especially among the cloud providers, that you work with. Yeah, so no, if I look at the table of contents, right, like it's actually really cool and very inclusive. So I look at you kind of start from the beginning on the system architecture, and then you kind of go through like the fundamental stuff like secrets, security, and then you move into enterprise management, more details about the Jinja 2 templates, and then you kind of open it broad and tackle each of the fields like roles and how to extend Ansible, troubleshooting Ansible, and so on. So is that kind of like the flow of the book, or am I misinterpreting kind of your intent to take the readers through the Ansible journey?
No, you absolutely nailed it. That is how it's done. So it's broken down, trying to start with the real fundamentals and the basics
Mm-hmm.
of Ansible, and then building up to, so towards the end of it, it's looking at, so for example, chapter 11, minimizing downtime with rolling deployments. So by that
Yeah.
stage in the book, we're actually getting to, okay, this is how you might use Ansible in a real world scenario, as opposed to the preceding chapter, chapter 10 on extending Ansible. There's a lot of Python in there.
Yeah.
So we're still looking at the internals of Ansible at that point. And then what's not shown there on the table of contents, but I think if you look at the book's table of contents, is it's divided into 3 broad sections.
Okay.
So, but they are exactly as you've described. So we're starting with the core and the fundamentals. We're then looking at the Ansible language itself, and then at the end, it's sort of like more real world application, if you will.
Right. Yeah, I don't think I've seen anywhere else that has these this particular chapter, right? Like, because that combines your real world experience on how do you minimize downtime when you have competing playbooks, maybe changing the same thing, but how do you do, even when you say blue and red team, right? Like when you're rolling things out, how do you gradually roll out so you can always back out and the blast radius for any mistake is minimized?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we both know that's so important, right?
Well, yeah, it's important, but it's hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially with automation tools. I mean, you think poking your eye hurts? Try it, like do it in like 1,000 times per second, right?
Oh,
You don't even have
yeah.
a chance to stop. Sorry, you were saying?
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. I mean, I wrote another book as well, which hasn't done as well as Mastering Ansible by my own admission, but hands-on enterprise automation. There you go, that one there. So that was kind of like, it is Ansible, but it's not specifically an Ansible book. It's all about my experiences of building Linux environments at scale and what I think is the best practice for doing
Oh,
that. So that is
nice.
the idea behind this book was it was supposed to be the ultimate real world. This is how you would build a large scale Linux environment and manage it.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I gotta check out this book as well. And of course, we'll include all the links in the show notes on both Mastering Ansible as well as the Handson Enterprise Automation on Linux. Something that kind of interests me because you wrote this book on Linux, but you also include a whole chapter in Mastering Ansible on Windows management. Is that something that people typically associate with, like managing Windows machine with Ansible? Can you talk a little bit into that?
Sure. I mean, we both worked in the technology industry a long time, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of evangelism, which is not a bad thing in itself. But I've worked with a lot of people who are like, I work with Linux and Windows is awful, and you know,
The
let's
evil
not even talk
empire.
about it. Yeah, you have to reboot it every 5 seconds, and we all know the stuff.
Right. Right.
And then the same is true on the other side of the fence as well. It's just the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think because I've been so focused on clients for so long, what you learn when you do that is actually being evangelical. It doesn't help anyone, because if you go into a business today, they're going to have Windows, they're going to have
Right.
Linux. Depending on their age, they may have AIX or other stuff knocking around as well. But very rarely is one business just one technology across the board.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and I think you have to be realistic about that personally. And so Windows is, there, even in Linux, heavy Linux environments, my experience is there's always Windows servers there.
Yeah.
And so I think the point of that chapter is to highlight that I can't remember which release it came in now. Probably around the same sort of release cadence you were talking about, where the networking was enhanced as well. But basically, all the fundamental features, modules that are there for Linux are now there for Windows as well. So if you can do it for Linux, you can do it for Windows, from package installation, manipulating file systems, manipulating the registry, all that kind of thing. And so, repository services like Chocolatey have come
Okay.
about now. So where before you used to have to kind of take MSI packages and figure out how to do unattended installations,
Right.
now there are packaging services for Windows where you can go and say, hey, actually, I just want to install this app, and it goes away and does it, and you can do it from the command line, which is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is true. So at least when I was working with Ansible closely, I remember all the modules were most of the modules were written in Python, right, for Ansible, but the only exception was Windows, and those were written in PowerShell. So I want to say that was the case. I don't know if that's still the case. Do you have any thoughts about that?
So I haven't checked on I think when I updated my machine the other day, I updated to Ansible 5.3, and I must admit I haven't pulled that apart.
Yeah,
But
sure.
I know when I was working on the fourth edition that we're talking about here, it was all PowerShell based
I
still.
see. Yeah.
So, and I think that fits in very heavily with the agentless idea of
Right.
Ansible is, on a Windows, on a Linux environment, starting with that, you can almost always guarantee there's going to be some sort of Python environment installed. So,
Right.
because
Right.
although they say agentless, what they mean is it will have an SSH server running and it will have a Python environment of some sort on there. So,
Right.
which is like 90% of the Linux distributions you install. So,
Yeah.
it's a pretty
Yeah.
safe bet.
Yeah.
On Windows, you cannot guarantee Windows is going to have a working Python distribution
Oh,
on
for
it.
sure. Yeah. No.
So, yeah, so the original Windows was WinRM and PowerShell, because you can pretty much guarantee you're going to have PowerShell, and WinRM is there. It just needs turning on. What is quite exciting, if you're a geek like I am, is the Windows, as most people probably are aware, they've integrated some tools like OpenSSH and curl and things like that into the core distribution.
Sure.
Ansible, last I checked, it was still in preview, but it works now over OpenSSH to Windows.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Interesting. Are you talking about Windows 11 or are you talking about Windows 12 maybe?
So I tested this with Windows Server 2019.
Oh, server. Okay, got it.
But it should work with any Windows distribution that has OpenSSH built in. So I think that's Windows 10. I think it's later releases of Windows 10, Windows 11. I'm not sure going to earlier releases whether you can put a port of OpenSSH on, whether that works or not. That I haven't tried.
Yeah.
But what I can say is, if Windows comes with an option like, you load the control panel of the features, optional features to turn on, an OpenSSH server is listed there, it works. That much I did test. Yeah.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah, that's always been kind of having worked for Microsoft, it's kind of funny that that I don't know as much as I should about like the Windows system. But definitely, as you alluded to, James, it's kind of I think networking and Windows are kind of bastard childs for Ansible, just because as you were saying, you can't always bank on the Python interpretation on the networking gears that you were talking about, nor can you bank on for Windows. So I remember, when I was telling people about Ansible for networking, the first thing I changed is always like gather facts, no, right? Connection local, because you can't really do that for the other networking gears. But one thing good that I think they had the foresight of doing was to make things more declarative instead of imperative. So when you're saying, like copy files, as you were saying, if you're saying, or backup configuration, for example, if you're declarative, you just say true or false or yes or no, versus being imperative where you have to go step by step and say, okay, copy file over, copy run start, or something like that. So by doing more declarative, you offload all the heavy work, heavy lifting to the module, and then whether your module use OpenSSH or WinRM or anything like that, you kind of abstracted away from the user.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's where Ansible has been very clever, and the framework has been well received by so many developers. Like you say, with networking equipment, you can put all the intelligence, all the heavy lifting into the Python code in the module, and then it really doesn't matter to the person writing the automation code. Maybe it's talking over an HTTP API to the switch, but that's abstracted away from the user. So as long as, like you said, as long as you turn off fact gathering, which is the default, I expect Python and SSH to be up and running.
Yeah.
It kind of works, and it can work over protocols that are masked from the user. So it just makes life really easy for people.
Yeah. Yeah. So cool. Can you tell us a little bit about AWX? So not to be confused with AWS, right? But like AWX, I don't know who does the marketing over there, but they kind of dropped the ball in this one because I don't know. But can you just tell us a little bit about it? What is this? What does it do? How do you get started on that?
Sure. So AWX is backtrack a little bit, when Red Hat acquired Ansible, Ansible Tower was a closed source product, so you had to buy it. There was no other option.
Right.
Red Hat's commitment, my understanding, has always been to open source everything that they do. And so they kept that promise. They open sourced Ansible Tower, and Ansible Tower became AWX. As you say, who chooses the names? I don't know.
Right. Probably not with Red Hat anymore, but who knows?
Absolutely. So, and AWX is a GUI for Ansible, but it's not an IDE, is one of the places that a lot of people I've worked with sort of trip up initially. Is it doesn't let you do anything with playbook development, but what it is it's an enterprise solution for running your playbooks. So the challenge for most businesses is, okay, we put Ansible in. If you end up with all your engineers having Ansible on their workstations, how do you control who ran what, who's got authentication keys to what? You know, like you were saying about poking your eye. You know, what if you don't even know who's poking your eye 1,000 times a second?
All these rogue playbooks that's running in the wild, like you got to go track it down.
Yeah, absolutely. So that could very quickly become, it's one of those things in technology where we mean well, but actually all we did was we moved the problem somewhere else.
Right.
You know,
right.
So what AWX does is it's a web-based control panel for playbooks. It does credential management very cleverly. So you can put things like root passwords if you want to, obviously we all know we shouldn't be using root passwords, but let's say you did. That can go into AWX. It's encrypted at rest in the database. You can't see the password in the GUI anywhere, but you can, through the access control, you can let people use that password to run a playbook.
Right.
So you're not giving away the sort of the keys to the kingdom, as it were, through distributing SSH keys or anything like that.
Right.
And then it integrates with just about every directory provider that you're most likely to come across. So everybody logs in with their own account, and then there's a full audit trail of, okay, Bob logged in at this time, ran this playbook, this was the outcome. So there's that audit trail that businesses need as well. So it's basically, it is a GUI. It's sort of a point and click for running playbooks, but it's a lot more than that, because it's all about the auditability and the control that businesses need running automation at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we joke about it, right? But it's very true. Like, we do need some kind of, especially in the enterprise environment, some kind of centralized management for your rotating your keys, your authentication and authorization levels. So, Bob in this example, maybe he's authorized to touch fulfillment centers, right? Warehouses, but he shouldn't be let loose on core devices, or somebody else who has the expertise on managing, Juniper devices. They shouldn't have the full access to Cisco devices, for example, or something like that. And then at the end of the day, the accountability, as you were mentioning, who did what, so that when there's, kind of a root cause analysis, 2 weeks later, then you can actually have audit trail back into like the sequences of events, versus you just don't know. Everybody was using the same password.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing as well is source control. So just drop that in there as well. And again, people can do source control on their laptops, but you might forget to do a git pull before you run a playbook, for example. It would be easy to do. You can configure AWX to, if someone runs a playbook, it can be configured to go out and pull from a Git repository before it does the run. So you know that everybody's sort of using the same version of code.
Yeah. Well, speak for yourself. I always, no, just kidding. No. We've all been there, right? Like, it's 2 a.m. in the morning, you're supposed to do something, but you had one drink too much the night before. So it's always helpful to have these like kind of guardrails for you, so you don't fall off the cliff, right? It doesn't protect you 100%, but at least it doesn't, it helps you to stay on the right path. And I like the fact that Red has, so the way it was explained to me when you were talking about AWX and Ansible Tower was, they kind of took the Fedora, Linux, and Red Hat enterprise kind of approach. So one thing is always, open source and one step ahead and kind of more experimental and runs faster with features. And the other is kind of stable if you want an enterprise, enterprise C security blanket, then here's the more stable release for a Red Hat release. So at least that's how it was explained to me, and it just kind of alluded to what you were talking about on being more stable, having these models of both open source, and they could still kind of reap the benefits of their product.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, the AWX is definitely a bit bleeding edge. We put a release in for a customer once that would only accept passwords that were comprised of. You remember the original 7-bit ASCII, the first 27 characters?
Vaguely, yeah.
Before it even went to 256, and they put a British pound symbol in their password.
Oh, okay. Oh,
And then
wow.
couldn't log
Okay.
in because it couldn't deal with 8-bit ASCII. And I
Oh,
don't know how
no.
this happened, but this was a sort of like, so that was a bleeding edge experience of AWX. But equally, it was fixed incredibly rapidly. We raised an issue on GitHub and it was fixed in a couple of days. So
very cool.
Great community behind it.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I feel like Ansible should pay you some kind of commission by now, because all these time you were like advocating Ansible, and I mean Red Hat or IBM now should pay you some kind of commission. But just to play the devil's advocate, right? So can you think of any situation where Ansible may not be as applicable, or where, I don't know, something like Terraform has a leg up? I mean, being an author, I know it's a tough ask, but I want to put James on the spot and say, is there any situation where Ansible may not be the right tool for you?
So I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
I can't sit here and say what I said about Windows and Linux and then go, no, Ansible is the right tool for everything.
Yeah.
I don't know other tools well enough to give you a sort of well thought out answer on that. But the way things are in technology, it's like there's two sort of facets to products. One is, what is user preference? What do people like? I did some work with Chef at a previous company, and I just found the language very cryptic. Now that might just be me. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with Chef. It's just like Chef and I didn't click. So personal preference. And the other thing is, certain automation tools are very much geared towards certain technology. Terraform has certain specialisms in the cloud, is my understanding. So
Sure.
Ansible certainly has broad support for the cloud, but if you put Ansible and Terraform head to head, what would you find? I don't know, because I've never tried it. But I think one has to remain open-minded about this stuff.
Yeah, that's fair and honest. I think so. It used to be, I think, for me, kind of the stock answer. I mean, if you put me on the spot, would have been, if you have lots and lots of Windows machine, it's like, the percentage of it's less. Like if you have majority of Windows machine, then you have to do it through, I don't know, domain controller or whatever. Then I don't know it well enough, like you, right? I mostly work in Linux environment. But I think your answer was fair and honest, right? Like you just have to be kept up with the trends. You have to know your client's environment and the kind of technology stack in the background, right? Like if you use GitLab and it's all Puppet and Chef and Rails, then maybe in your automation framework you got to gear toward more of a Rail backend.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's just, certainly if you were doing this as a business, most businesses that I've worked with would evaluate several products side by side before they committed themselves to one. And they would have some sort of matrix or scorecard or something that would be, this is why we're choosing this. And I think that's a sane approach. You've got to look at things on their own merit and what's right for your use case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking from like a true customer advocate, as you are, to say, hey, that's what's required. So I wanted to ask you, I know we're coming up on the hour, but I want to ask you, from your expert advice, how can people get started with automation and Ansible?
So there's myriad of resources.
Yeah, buy your book, for example.
Yeah, that would be a great one. Yeah, buy 2 copies, buy one for a friend. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And one for your parents and one for your kids. And then we'll talk.
Yeah, for sure. But no, I mean, all that aside, I think it depends a lot on your preferred learning style. You know, some people are more visual, video oriented. Some people are more written word oriented
Yeah,
for learning style, things like that. You know,
sure.
I know, I personally, I think the Ansible documentation is very good.
Yeah, I
A
agree.
lot. It's one of my better open source products. You know, it's one where I really think, hey, you can go to this and look up the official documentation, and you're almost certainly going to find the answer.
Yeah.
Um, and you can't say that for all the open source things that are out there. Hell, I mean, you know, I've written some software, and have I documented it well? No, it's like, I'll do that later. You
Yeah.
know.
Right. Right.
And it's like that blog I never updated. Later hasn't come yet. So
Right. The book will get updated before you update your blog or
yeah,
your open source
absolutely.
project documentation.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I always say to people, go to the official Ansible documentation as your starting point. Um, I think there's some great material out there, great training courses and things like that. I recently took the RHCE because mine's expiring
Oh,
in
okay.
June, and when I took the RHCE on Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6, it was all system administration tasks. Now on 8, it's all Ansible based.
Oh, okay.
So you
Interesting.
actually, although the same core tasks, you know, I know you're not allowed to talk about Red Hat exams, but this is all on the Red Hat website, so I'm pretty sure
Sure.
I'm
It's
safe
public
saying that.
information.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like they expect you now to solve all the problems with Ansible.
Oh, got it. Okay. So it's more
So,
integrated into the Red Hat ecosystem.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So if you were specifically Red Hat integrated, you would probably do well to go on sort of Red Hat's training, which is, you know,
Yeah.
I'm not affiliated with them. It's just like I actually have taken their training and you know, I passed their exams. So I think the results speak for themselves, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah. So Red Hat, if you're listening or watching, give James a call. His account number is here that you
yeah,
could like wire your commission to him because he's been your biggest fan and advocate. He wrote a book about Ansible and now he's talking about getting a Red Hat engineering certification.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, take cash as well. So it's all
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
precisely. It doesn't matter which kind of currency. British pound be good. US dollar works as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
no, but I would definitely second on these Ansible documentation being excellent. It's free. It's great. Just go take a look. For me, a personal experience was when I submit my Ansible module. Like the technical bit was pretty straightforward. Like the biggest back and forth between me and the maintainer to get the code merged was upon documentation, right? Like they were talking about you didn't explain this well, you were missing a period. So to back to your point, James, about they really take care of the kind of documentation that they want because at the end of the day, it saves them time, right? As maintainer, and they only have so much hours. So the preferred way was people to get their documentation first. And coincidentally, that'll be a great way to get started with Ansible, just taking a look at their documentation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was digging into the code and updating the book to the third edition, there's some bits in the book that we talked about where we look at writing your own modules and things like that, and
Yeah,
it shows in there how you put the documentation in. And as you say, Ansible made this really core to the project. You cannot submit code without documentation.
right.
So, and I just think that's not a common behavior to see.
Hmm.
But I think it's such an inspired idea because otherwise, we've all done it. It's like, yeah, I've done the hard bit, I've done the code, right? People will know how to use it. It'll be fine.
Sure, sure.
Yeah,
With like fingers crossed. Yeah. And then 5 years later, you wonder why there's only, 3 stars to your GitHub repo. You're like, hey, it's excellent. Why don't people use it? They don't really know about it.
yeah, absolutely. Because not everyone's got time to read the code to figure it out, right?
Exactly. I mean, there's a reason why they want to just download and be done with it, right? Like the soccer practice at 5 for their kid is more important than reading your code and figuring out on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Hey, James, it's been great. I mean, it's good to see you. A lot of stuff I didn't know about prior to our conversation, and I learned today. So I thank you very much for for taking the time and being here. I think it really benefits the listener as well as myself. It's always just the most fun part for me. It's always talk to a person like you and just kind of glean and pick their brains upon things that they feel passionate about. But before we leave, I want to ask if there's any call to action besides buying your book or just technology in general, right? Because you also mentioned you're an empowerment coach. So any call to action for people out there who may be wanting to get started in technology, who want to get started in Ansible, or just life in general?
So I think my biggest piece of advice to anyone in technology really would be, don't forget the human beings. Don't forget the why behind why things are done, because I've fallen prey to it myself. I actually enjoy technology. I love technology, and it's like, yeah, this is great because, like you said, it's the new version. It's like the version that went up, so that's got to be good, right?
Yeah.
There's no psychology in that. There's no actual sort of like, why does it benefit me? And one of the reasons that I got so passionate about automation was, just bringing this right back to the early part of our discussion today, is I realized that this is one of the solutions to the whole firefighting, the whole intelligent people bogged down and fixing the same problems over and over again.
Yeah.
And I've done a couple of talks on this. I'm very interested in positive psychology and things like that. It intersects with my coaching practice. And you're going to share a link, I believe, to a talk that I did at the London Ansible meetup, which is on YouTube.
Absolutely.
Same talk I did at Ansible Fest last year virtually, but I think that you have to sign up to see that. So we'll share the YouTube one. But yeah, if anyone's interested, please go out, have a look at that, and then you've got my social media handles. Get in touch if you want to discuss further.
Yeah, no, I really dig what you said about it's all about the human beings, right? Like at the end of the day, who cares about automation unless it can help you, right? And we joked about it, but it wasn't. But it's also true that your son's soccer practice at 5 is more important to you than to reading some code or play through playbooks or fondle around with YAML files. So I really like that bit about it's all about the people. And of course we will link on the presentation by James over at the Ansible over at the Ansible London meetup, as well as we'll put the link in for your Ansible presentation as well. So if people so choose to register behind the wall, it's free, but it just have to register, and people could find you there. So you mentioned Twitter and LinkedIn, so people could find you on Twitter and LinkedIn, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the username James Freeman 959. There's a lot of James Freemans in the world. I can hide in a sort of obscurity by just using my real name, which is, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. But I was like, I tried to get James Freeman and it was taken. I was like, fine, I will add these numbers. They mean something to me. We won't go into that now. But generally, if you look on Twitter, LinkedIn, GitHub with that handle, you will find me. Probably other places as well.
Awesome. Hey, thanks again for being on the show, James. I really enjoy our talk and appreciate your time.
No, it's been amazing, Eric. Really appreciate you having me here. Thank you.
Thanks. So thank you for listening to the Network Automation Nerds podcast today. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other podcast platforms. Until next time, bye-bye.